So Deuteronomy 6, starting from verse 1. These are the commands, decrees, and laws of the Lord your God directed me to teach you to observe in the land that you are crossing the Jordan to possess, so that you, your children, and their children after them may fear the Lord your God as long as you live by keeping all his decrees and commands that I give you, so that you may enjoy long life. Hear, O Israel, and be careful to obey, so that it may go well with you, and that you may increase greatly in a land flowing with milk and honey, just as the Lord, the God of your fathers, promised you. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be upon your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road. When you lie down. And when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames. Write them on the door frames on your houses and on your gates. When the Lord your God brings you into the land he swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, to give you a land with large flourishing cities that you did not build, houses filled with all kinds of good things that you did not provide, wells you did not dig, and vineyards and olive groves that you did not plant. Then when you eat and satisfied, be careful that you do not forget the Lord, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. Fear the Lord your God and serve him only, and take your oaths in his name. Do not follow other gods, the gods of your peoples around you. For the Lord your God, who is among you, is a jealous God, and his anger will burn against you, and he will destroy you from the face of the land. Do not test the Lord your God as you did at Massah. Be sure to keep the commands of the Lord your God and the stipulations and decrees he has given you. Do what is right and good in the Lord's sight, so that it may go well with you, and you may go in and take over the good land that the Lord has promised on oath to your forefathers, thrusting out all your enemies before you, as the Lord said. In the future, when your sons ask you, what is the meaning of the stipulations, decrees, and laws of the Lord our God has commanded you, tell him, we were slaves of Pharaoh in Egypt, but the Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand. Before our eyes, the Lord sent miraculous signs and wonders, great and terrible, upon Egypt and Pharaoh and his whole household. But he brought us out from there to bring us in and give us the land that he has promised on the oath of our forefathers. The Lord commanded us to obey all the decrees and the fears of the Lord our God, so that we might all prosper and be kept alive, as is the case today. And if we are careful to obey all this law before the Lord our God, as he has commanded us, that will be our righteousness.
Thank you. Thank you, Kev. Thank you, band. Let me just make sure I'm on. There we go. Morning, everybody. Good morning. Welcome to Mickfield. Whether you've been here for ages or not at all, very welcome. Let's turn to Deuteronomy chapter 6. That's where we're going to be this morning. If you've got that in a Bible or on a device, that would be great. What's your orientation? What's your orientation? It's a funny word, isn't it, orientation? Our culture at the moment uses that often to describe your sexual orientation. What's your sexual orientation? And that's describing, of course, one part of someone's identity. And our culture very much does that, doesn't it? It breaks our identity down into different parts. And there are different parts, and one of them is that particular part. What's your orientation is often what we think a sexual orientation when we hear that word. But the Bible, the Christian faith, and Jesus have always come along and asked a much bigger, a much more profound, much more far-ranging, far-reaching question, which is, what is the fundamental orientation of your life? What's the fundamental orientation of your life? What's the centre of your life? What's the thing that your life is going to orient or maybe orbit around? What's the fundamental orientation of your life? Now, the Bible then goes on to claim, doesn't it, that there is this great God, this God of grace, who alone is God, as we saw last week. He's the fount of all beauty and life and joy and goodness, and he is infinitely worth knowing. And so it makes sense that people like me, who've lived at odds with that great God our whole lives, it makes sense that people like me and you, just like that, would turn to him, gain forgiveness from him, gain a pardon from him, and then orient the whole of our lives around him forever. That makes sense. That would be for his greatest glory, for our greatest possible good, for the greatest conceivable human flourishing, because he is that great God. And that's Deuteronomy 6. It's a call to orient our lives around him, to love him. And we're going to see that in three very practical ways this morning. The first thing is this. Love God with all you've got in the day-to-day. Love God with all you've got in the day-to-day, in the ordinary. I don't know how you're getting on with Deuteronomy so far, how you feel about it all, Rich. You know, it's long, it's a bit heavy, it's very Old Testament-y, isn't it? You know, Deuteronomy is the core of the Bible. It's the last of the first 5 books of the Bible, so that great introduction to the whole story. It really is the basis of the rest of the Old Testament and the New Testament that follows it as well. There are vast chunks of Paul and John in the New Testament which you simply wouldn't understand if you've not got Deuteronomy. And if quotes are anything to go by, then it's Jesus' favourite book. Right? Deuteronomy is Jesus' favourite book. It's the one that he refers to the most. And if Deuteronomy is the core of the Bible, then Deuteronomy 6 verses 4 and 5 are the core of the core of the core of the Bible. Deuteronomy 6 verse 4, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. If God is that God we saw last week, if he is God alone, if there is none besides him, well then it makes sense, doesn't it, that if he is God alone, that he gets our complete, total allegiance. He gets everything. It makes sense that we love him with everything that we have, that our lives orbit around him. Let me just show in a diagram form what these verses, we're having diagrams today, aren't we? What these verses tell us. So, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with 3 things, isn't it? With all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. And really what the words there are doing is picturing us like this. We've got a heart, we've got a core, right at the centre. That's the kind of centre of our being. It's the kind of engine room of our life, if you like. We've got an inner being, and then we've got our soul, which is kind of the whole person, That next layer, just the whole person, all that we are as a person. And then finally, around the edge, there we've got, it says your strength, doesn't it? Which is referring not just to your physical strength, but in a sense to all your strength. Your physical strength, yes, but everything, your kind of resources that you have. Socially or financially, economically, whatever it is, just everything that you've got. That's what it's describing. And it moves from the centre outwards, doesn't it? The way that Moses writes it, it moves from the heart, in the middle, all the way out to everything about our lives. Someone has put it like this: true spirituality arises from the heart and extends to all of life. That's true spirit. Sometimes we fall off either way with that, don't we? We forget that true spirituality comes from here. It's not actually about what we do. It comes from the heart. But then, from the heart, it flows into every area of our lives. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, all you've got. And then, the next few verses are patterned in the same way, aren't they? So verse 6, these commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. To go back to that framework again, the commandments are to be on your hearts. And then in the very next breath, verse 7, impress them on your children. So now we're moving out. We're still in the private sphere. We're kind of in the home, if you like. But now to your children, verse 7. And of course, talk about it when you walk along the road and all of that. And then verse 8, tie them as symbols on your hands and on your foreheads and write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates. It moves out to like all of your life. All the different parts, not just the private now, but the public life, your house, your work, everything. God alone gets all of that. Notice that Deuteronomy 6 says to us as Christians that we can't consign our Christian faith to the private sphere. Someone say that to you, it's all right, you've got your faith and I've got my views over here, but as long as you just sort of keep it to yourself, it's your private thing. You go to church on a Sunday, that's fine, but just kind of keep it there. But Deuteronomy 6 comes along and says, no, God's got a claim on the whole of our lives, private and public life as well, everywhere we go and all that we're about. It says, doesn't it, to internalize God's commands, and then impress them on our children, and then instill them into your house, onto your Facebook page, into your social media persona, or wherever you are online, to have God's word reaching into those places, into all of the fabric of our lives. And of course, this command does include our families, doesn't it? The way that we instruct our children is very important. As Christians, that we teach our children in those mundane moments. And that's what it describes, isn't it? It's just ordinary life. It's just walking along the road. It's nothing, in a sense, it's nothing fancy, is it? It's just as you go about. The other day, obviously preparing this, and I was literally walking along the road with my son. I thought, we're on. We're live. This is an opportunity, isn't it? Just whatever he's talking about, and then sort of maybe bring that round to something, explain something, just have a conversation about something about God in the ordinary day-to-day walking along of life. They're great opportunities. Someone said to us, when we first began to have young children, someone said, the days are long and the years go fast. And that's so true, isn't it? The days are long, often, that feels, but the years go fast. And in those long days, there are very ordinary, mundane, and sometimes highly stressful moments, but there are just moments where we can just say something about the Lord. Anything, it can be anything, couldn't it? You're walking along the road and an ambulance goes by. Okay, well, let's just stop and let's just pray for wherever that's going. And just basic little things like that. Talking about nature, talking about what they're seeing as we're walking along, talk about how God made all of those things. Here on Mickfield, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with your children, in the ordinary, in the day-to-day. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is this. Love God with all you've got when things are all okay. That's where it goes next, doesn't it? So verse 10, when the Lord your God brings you into the land, remember that's where we're going. We're pressing pause in Deuteronomy right now, but they're heading into the promised land. When the Lord your God brings you into the land he swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, to give you a land with large flourishing cities you did not build, houses filled with all kinds of good things. And so he lists all the things that they've not provided for themselves. And then verse 12 is the conclusion, the punchline. He says, be careful that you do not forget the Lord who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. Isn't that a danger? That when things are going well, human beings tend to forget God. For them back then, that's very real. It is what would happen. We saw it, we didn't see it because I didn't read it, but in chapter 4, you might want to turn there, chapter 4, and Moses says, verse 25, after you've had children and grandchildren, and you've lived in the land a long time, if you then become corrupt and make any idol, and on into that section, Moses starts to describe how things are going to go wrong. They're going to forget the Lord, they're going to turn away from him, and it starts off sounding like this might happen, and by the end it's like, this is going to happen. There's that tension in the book of Deuteronomy, isn't there? All the way through between sort of positive and negative. Towards the end, Moses says this. He's had a bad day or something, got out wrong side of the bed or whatever. But he said, I know how rebellious and stiff-necked you are. If you have been rebellious against the Lord while I am still alive and with you, how much more would you rebel after I die? And Moses is very concerned about the people here. I'm no musician. As you know, and I bet you're glad that I'm not for sure, though I have strayed into Liam Gallagher impersonation at times, but what happens at Sizewell stays on Sizewell, so there we go. But I'm no musician, and musicians may say, Rich, well, actually afterwards that illustration completely falls down. But there is an understanding in the Western world, isn't there, that when we say there's the major and minor key, that they're kind of two different feels of music, two different sounds, if you like. They do a different thing. So the major key, if you like, is associated with kind of upbeat. It's more positive. It feels more positive and upbeat and cheerful, if you like. And then the minor key is like more sad and melancholy, or maybe a bit ominous. Oh, what's going to happen? Like films use this all the time, don't they? Different music to signal different things. And really, Deuteronomy is like that. It's played in the major and the minor key all the way through. Sometimes it's like, great, they're going to go into the land. It's exciting, and then other times you think, oh, this is going to go wrong for God's people. And so that was very live for them. Don't forget the Lord. You know, when things go well in the land, don't forget the Lord. But isn't it for us as well in our lives? When things are going well, there is that terrible danger for us that we become smug, that we become self-satisfied, that we kind of got it. We've got it sorted. It's going well, and we forget to depend on him and remember him and revere him and be satisfied not in those things but in him. It's a great danger for us, isn't it? The song "Blessed Be Your Name," we sing it quite often, don't we? Matt and Beth Redmond wrote that song. Blessed be your name, you know, and they wrote it around the time after 9/11. They were very conscious that as Christians we'd not got much in the way of lament. How do we go, this is awful, in our songs in church? And also they'd gone through some stuff as a family as well, as a couple, and they wanted to write a song that could help us capture some of that. And it does, doesn't it? The song kind of goes two ways, doesn't it? Blessed be your name in the land that is plentiful, where your streams of abundance flow. Or later on, when the sun's shining down on me, when the world's all as it should be, blessed be your name. Praise God when things are going well. And then equally in that song, blessed be your name when I'm found in the desert place. Though I walk through the wilderness, blessed be your name. On the road marked with suffering, though there's pain in the offering, blessed be your name. And that's a great challenge for us, isn't it? To praise him, to love and worship him when it's going really quite well, and when it's going abysmally badly, and everything in between. What's your challenge today? Are you going through a really hard season and the challenge is to bless and praise his name in the thick of it? Or actually are you in a season where you think, God, actually things are on the up a bit, and the danger is always to take our eyes off of him and onto how well it's going. It's a challenge, isn't it? But wonderfully, you also see God's grace in these verses, don't you? It's amazing, the description of this land they're going into, verse 11, a land with large flourishing cities. Did you notice the repetition? You did not build. And houses filled with all kinds of good things you did not provide, and wells you did not dig, and vineyards and olive groves that you did not plant. You see here, you see God's grace. They've not contributed to this new land. They've not earned it. No, it's an inheritance, isn't it? He's giving them an inheritance. It's not something that they've worked towards. No, literally, he's giving them a load of stuff that they've not done anything for. And Deuteronomy's really clear about this. So chapter 7, a bit later on, Moses says, look, you're not going into the promised land because you're bigger than the other nations around you. Somehow sort of bigger, there's more of you, so God thinks, oh, well, I'll give it to them. No, you're not going into the promised land because you're bigger. And then chapter 9, you're not going into the promised land because you're better. He says it's not your righteousness. That's not why you're going into the promised land. No, the promised land is a gift of God's grace to them, for them. I just want to pause there a moment. In this series in Deuteronomy, as we're going through this book, I don't know about you, but sometimes you read it and you think, hang on, what's going on here? Is this grace? Or is it works? Because there's a lot of rules. There's a lot of commands. I mean, this chapter's full of them, isn't it? All this language, the first 4 verses, you know, these are the commands, these are the decrees, these are the laws. So how does it work, Rich? Like, for them back then, is God dealing with them with grace? Or do they have to earn their way into the land? Or do they have to kind of keep it up so that they can stay in the land? And what, never mind about them, how does that translate for us? Like, what does this mean? As I read Deuteronomy, like, where do I stand with all of this grace and laws and commands? There's so many times in this chapter when God says to them, if you do this, then you'll get this. You think, is that how it worked for them? Is that how it works for us? How did it work for them back then? For them back then, God is a God of grace. He always is. And his gracious gift of the land and the laws that he's giving them. They're a gracious gift to the people. And they're called to loyal covenant love. They're called to respond. Love the Lord your God with all your heart. And they're called to loyal covenant love because he is God alone and he gets all. They don't, they express that love and that worship in obedience. That's how they express it. They obey God, but that doesn't earn them the land. It's a gift of God's grace to them. But God's commands are to mark the way that they live once they're in the land, right? God's commands are best. He made everything. He set everything up. He knows how the world works. He's given good commands for his people's good. It's the best way to live, and so they're called to live like that in the land. And there's another layer to it for them. Old Testament story. God made a covenant, an arrangement, a relationship with Adam. Adam failed. God came along and made a covenant, an arrangement with Abraham. All the promises, and Abraham failed. God made a covenant here with Israel, God's people, through Moses, but with all the people, he made this arrangement and this agreement with them, right? If they obey his commands, then he will bless them. If they disobey, then they will receive the curses. That's Deuteronomy. That's the covenant there. And lo and behold, as the story goes on, they fail. They get it wrong. And they fail. And then God makes a covenant with David. And David fails. And there is this kind of weight hanging on the people here as we're looking at this book in growth groups, aren't we, at the moment? God's big picture. And Vaughan Roberts, the author there, he says this, of this exact moment. Really what it sounds like is, don't blow it like we did. You know, don't blow it like we did. We messed up the previous generation, and they're saying to them, no, don't blow it. And of course they do blow it. They fail. Each time they fail. That's the story of the Old Testament, isn't it? Tim Keller describes it like this. The people, these big characters in the Old Testament, it's not the heroes of the faith. No, he says, no, these are people that people of the world would not expect to be in the Bible story. They're moral failures. The Bible is not primarily a series of stories with a moral. It does have practical lessons. Rather, the Bible is a record of God's intervening grace in the lives of people who don't seek it, who don't deserve it, who continually resist it, and who don't appreciate it after they've been saved by it. That's the Bible story. And all of those relationships, all of those covenants, all of those people, all of those big characters of the Old Testament, they all fail. And then fast forward to the New Testament and the New Covenant. And Jesus Christ succeeds where everyone has failed. So that's the position of them back then. How does that map onto us right now? Well, let's not deny the similarities. God is a God of grace. He's treated us with grace. And he's called us to live in this relationship of loyal covenant love. We're called to live like that. We're called to give him all that we have and all that we are, all that we've got. That doesn't earn our place, but it does mark the way that we should live in this land until we're taken home. And God's ways are best, and we're in the family now, and his family values are best for us. I just wanted to flesh that out because I think we do wrestle with this. As we hear all of these commands and laws and decrees, how does that fit with us? And in some ways our position is similar to theirs, and in one particular way it is very different. You know, just don't blow it, was what they were saying in Deuteronomy to these people. Well, that weight does not hang on us, because our covenant head, Jesus Christ, has obeyed where everyone disobeyed. He has succeeded where everyone failed in our place for us. And so we are free now to live for him with all our heart, with all our soul, with all our strength. Love God with all you've got when things are all okay. And then the third and final thing is this: love God with all you've got in the gospel relay. Just read verse 20 with me. In the future, new situation, new challenge. So they've been tested with when life is good, and now they get tested by their own kids, right? In the future, when your son asks you, what is the meaning of the stipulations, decrees, and laws the Lord our God has commanded you? Now, I think that's a bit polished and posh. That's Moses giving them an example of what the son might ask them, but it's a bit polished and posh, isn't it? I don't think there are many kids that would say, Dad, what is the meaning of the stipulations, decrees, and laws the Lord our God has commanded you? I just can't imagine them saying that. I imagine more an Israelite father with his son over breakfast time. Perhaps they're sat outside the tent, or maybe, well, they probably haven't built a house yet. They're probably still in tents, but they're sat outside the tent, and it's breakfast time. And little Israelite boy says to Israelite daddy, Dad, can I have some yogurt? And Daddy says, yeah, you can have some yogurt. There's some there. You can have some of that. And he says, well, Dad, I want a Muller corner. Right? And Israelite dad says, well, Muller corners haven't been invented, son. I mean, we haven't even got plastic. We can't even do the tippy thing yet, but you can have some yogurt. Your mother's made it for you. There it is, you have yogurt. He's not so keen on that. He says, well, I could do you toast. Right, we've got bread and fire, I can make you some toast. So they're out there having breakfast and they're talking, and of course it's Dad can have this and Dad can have that. And then the little boy turns to the dad and he says, Dad, why, parents you know, right, why, Dad, why the other day did you lend that man your coat? And then he says, Dad, why the other day that man was there and the donkey had fallen over and you helped him to lift the donkey back up and get it back on its feet? And Dad, why is our toilet right over there? Like it's miles away from here. And Dad, why do we give 10% of everything that we've grown? Why do we give that back to God? And Dad, what's all this about the Passover? I don't understand. What does it mean? And Dad, you know when you built that house, why did you put a parapet around the roof? And Dad, you know the other day that foreign guy turned up, didn't he? And Dad, you were really kind to him. Dad, why did you do that? And Dad, that guy over there, he owed you quite a lot of money. But after 7 years, you just cancelled the debt. Dad, why did you do that? Now at that point, Israelite Dad's got a few options, hasn't he? His son's asking him, like, why are you following all these commands, Dad? Why are you living like this? He's got a few options in front of him. Here's one of them. Israelite Dad turns to him and he says, son, we just do it. Right? We just do it. We just grit our teeth and we just get on with it. Right? He's a northern Israelite dad, right? And we just get on with it. We just, this is what we've been told to do, and so this is what we do. We just, God said, and that's what we got to do. Look, both of your granddads fought in the wars against King Og, and your granny raised 12 kids with one arm, so we just grit our teeth and we get on with it, right? And that's it. That's one option for Israelite dad. Another, rather different option for Israelite dad is, hey, dude, let's not talk about the meaning of this. What's the meaning to you? What do you think the meaning might be? Let's explore this together in the mosaic of life, and maybe we could get some paints out and just go crazy and just see where it leads us, and then we'll try and sort of see what we think about this whole meaning thing, dude. That's another option for Israelite dad. But thankfully, this particular Israelite dad is not a grumpy Geshem or a legalistic Levi, and neither is he a postmodern Pedaiah or Peor. What does he say? Verse 21. Or what is he supposed to say? We were slaves. We were slaves, and it was bad, it was sad, it was dark, it was miserable. We were slaves, son. And God rescued us. God brought us out with a mighty hand. He redeemed us. He saved us, and all of those other things that he describes there. That's what he's to tell his son. Dad, why do we live like this? Because we were slaves and God saved us. And so now God shapes us and he gets all of us. Is that different to how we might talk to our own? I was a slave to sin, and Jesus Christ died for me. And he's alive. He's my king. And so now I give everything to him, son. Everything. Notice with me the eyes here. Verse 18, the command he gives is, do what is right and good in the Lord's sight. What God sees you doing. But notice here, in verse 22, he's commanded to say, before our eyes. Before our eyes. See, before God ever sees them do anything for him, they see God do everything for them. That's the gospel, isn't it? That's our good news. Son, before we ever followed any of those commands, God saved us, and so now we seek to follow him. He's the God of grace who brought us out and gave us life. Anyone watch the Olympics? No, actually, not many. I did watch a little bit of it, watch some of it. There is, of course, the relay race, isn't there? And that's what's been described here, isn't it? It's the relay race. It's the gospel relay. We've got to pass the baton on to not just our own children, if God has blessed us with children, but to the children here. All of them, the children and young people in our church. We say, look, we were slaves, but the God of grace saved us, and now we live like this. That's a challenge for us as parents. Of course it is. It is a challenge. It's hard work in the trenches of parenting life, for sure. It's a challenge for us as a church as well to think now generationally, to think about our children and our children's children and their children, to think long term now, generationally. What is the gospel legacy that we will leave behind for our children and our children's children and on into the future, however long God gives us, as we love God with all we've got, in the ordinary, when things are okay, and when they're not, and onward to our children and our children's children, for his great glory and for their greatest possible good. Let's pray. Father, Kev already warmed us up to this. You love us so much, and we so often don't love you as we should. Father, would you forgive us, and would you help us to love you with all that we've got by the power of the Spirit, to live for you, to love you with all of our heart, with all of our soul, with all of our strength. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen.